Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we have the live Q&A for the INTJ personality. And so Michael, would you like to tell us a bit about you?
I'm Michael. I've been here before. Never quite sure what to say in these. I have a channel on here and happy to be here. A little nervous about the live format. We haven't gone live before, I think, and Joyce is always pretty merciful when it comes to chopping out my long silences as I desperately try to come up to an answer.
Sometimes I chop out too many of your silences in the video.
So yeah, where do we start?
Sure.
I wish I had the questions.
Yeah, Michael, how do you experience NI, your dominant function?
I lost audio. Sorry. Hang on one sec.
No worries.
All right, I'm back. Sorry.
Welcome back. And so, Michael, how do you experience introverted intuition NI in the dominant slot?
I mean, it's always a hard one to describe because, I mean, it is by definition a background process. I think I've described it in the past as just sort of being a little bit detached from reality. Things sort of sorting themselves out in the background a lot of the time, and having faith in that happening. I think what I talked about in the last video was that the best sort of concrete example of introverted intuition that I've experienced is probably active imagination, which is just a sort of technique of kind of working yourself into a trance and just sort of, I mean, it sounds more goofball and schizophrenic than it is, but just sort of having a conversation with your mind and, you know, characters in your mind. And it's sort of some of those background processes sort of surface in those through that activity. So I think just in a concrete sense, I don't want to go into too much detail of what that's like. It just feels very private. But I mean, it's a difficult function to describe, just even for those of us who have it, and especially because they're like just radically different interpretations just around like this field of what it is. So that's a whole conversation unto itself, I think.
Yeah, background processing. And so how do you experience your auxiliary function extroverted thinking, TE?
I think of extroverted thinking as a linear process, probably closer to temporal logic than anything else, focused on managing tangible resources, very pragmatic, very practical, and that sort of, you know, general resource management would take precedence over theory and the kind of truth of theory. It's sort of the pragmatic comes first. Not that I disregard the other thing, you know, coming out of introverted thinking. I don't think I'm a slouch when it comes to introverted thinking or extroverted intuition for that matter, but it just doesn't come first. I think the common description is that extroverted thinking is focused on objective facts. That's another one that you go into a rabbit hole in terms of how do we define that. And I think theories of reality come into play with a lot of these things, as with introverted intuition as well. But in general, I think pragmatism, practicality, getting
the job done. Yeah. And so Michael, how do you experience your tertiary function introverted feeling, FI?
I'm pretty conscious of how I feel at any given moment. Sometimes have more or less control over that, depending on the mood and what's going on. I think just in general, in terms of defining the function, I mean, I'm just more driven by my own personal, subjective, idiosyncratic system of values, as opposed to sort of public or interpersonal, like shared function of valuation.
Yeah, and Michael, how do you experience your repressed function, extroverted sensing?
erratically. Yeah, in terms of preferring extroverted sensation, I mean, I tend to perceive what's in front of me or experienced in the moment much, much more vividly than any sort of lingering impression of anything. So I mean, just in terms of the two like sensate functions, then that would be the preference, but it's the I mean, it's the inferior function. So it's I'm better than I used to be at it. I think body awareness is very important, and it's sort of keeping, you know, some activity going that keeps the body like present in mind is useful. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of easy to feel outside of your body, so extroverted sensing makes you feel like a little more present. And so what are the downsides of NI?
It's hard to explain yourself a lot of the time. I mean, it's extroverted thinking helps, but you could still, I mean, I'll still struggle for the kind of, you know, to verbalize something just because it's unclear in mind until it sort of clarifies itself. If it's not ready to come out yet, it's not like the extroverted intuition where you could just bounce it off the wall like a tennis ball, which I'm not terrible at, but just not, I mean, that spontaneous in the moment extroverted kind of intuitive perception is sort of, I mean, it needs more time to work on something before it surfaces. And it's also, it can be kind of a, I mean, you know, if you go toward the Jungian definition of the function, I mean, like things would surface in dream, you know, that would be, I mean, this is more archetypal kind of definition of introverted intuition. And it can be more of a haunting thing if like things aren't going well. So it can be sort of a more or less demonic force, even if it's in that top slot. I think times when things weren't going well for me, there was sort of just you know, the more paranoid element of intuition starts to surface more, the more kind of depressive, demonic element of it starts to surface. So I think just because it's a superior function doesn't mean it doesn't have those aspects as well.
Yeah. One of the by effects of NI sometimes is awareness of implications and consequences. So sometimes that also comes with the downside of knowing implications and consequences of things.
Well, that's kind of one of the cliches, right? It's like the Cassandra complex. It's just saying, no, this is going to go wrong. This is exactly how it's going to go wrong. And nobody listens to you. It happens sometimes. Still a cliche though.
Yeah. And so Naisu says, hi, Joyce and Michael. Thanks for having this live. Michael, what is the meaning behind your channel name, Countertype?
I don't like thinking about titles too much because they can feel like overdetermined, I think. So if I'm titling like a story or even the channel here, I just, you know, it's just sort of things surface and then one's like, oh, that sounds cool. There's really nothing else behind it. You know, I mean, obviously it's a term in the community, but there's no deeper meaning to that. One occasional misconception I'd like to dispel is that, you know, for introverted intuitives, everything is like imbued with meaning in some sense. It's like sometimes it's, you know, I mean, it's snappy, it's short, has a lot of like, you know, hard consonants. I don't know.
And so what did you think about typology before you got into it? What about now?
I had sort of the kind of stereotypical impression that a lot of people have of, you know, putting people in boxes and all of this pseudoscience and this and that. Yeah, it was really just going to the, well, because I in reading just the general descriptions of my type, it's sort of, you know, it pegged me pretty good. So I was interested in reading more and getting more like into the source material. And then you get into functions and you see how, I mean, depending from system to system, but you see how sort of flexible the system is and how supple it is. And then there's a lot of room to sort of maneuver within it. And it's not what I'd initially thought it was, but I don't remember having an incredibly strong opinion about it. It just wasn't something that I was interested in. So I had the impression that I think a lot of people outside who aren't too familiar with it tend to have. Joyce, did you feel the same ever, or were you always into
I was into validating it for myself, so applying it to people I knew in real life to see how it still holds. And that's when I was sold, when my family members were very archetypical of their 16 type. And so I'm addicted because it pegged them right. And yeah, for me, the profile knew me better than anyone in my real life has ever described me ever. And so that meant something to me. And so I'm here 10 more layers later. And so
I'll add to that too. I write fiction, so I'm just interested in any sort of system like that on its own terms, whether it's applicable to real life or not. I mean, it's the same reason I'm into astrology. Like, I don't think there's, you know, tremendous synchronicity between like the alignment of planets and things that happen on Earth, but it's useful to get the gears turning. If I'm writing something, I need something to sort of get those gears turning. So it's another one of those things. It just happens that type is, you know, quite applicable to folks in life. I don't know my tri-type. Joyce, give me a tri-type.
5. Ooh. 5-1. This is on the spot. Oh no. Let me think about it.
Okay.
514? Question mark.
Sure.
How did you get into typology? What made you stay?
It's a little cloudy for me. I mean, I took the official Myers-Briggs for work. It's probably a decade ago. I didn't really get into type until just maybe 2 or 3 years ago, though. I mean, I took it. I wasn't. I mean, that was the point where I was mistyped based on the official test. That's what I should add that too. I was typed as an INFJ. I still test out as an INFJ. People still call me an INFJ from time to time. I think the only system that really I would be an INFJ, just from poking around the different systems, would be Voltology, and I have opinions about that system, but we can leave that aside for now. But I think, I think that's still when I had the just the sort of concept of type that comes from just having those 4 letters bouncing around and not a function-based understanding, which wasn't described to us in that forum, but that's when I was first introduced to it. Yeah, and then getting back into it, I don't even remember. It might have been just popping around the internet. It had to be something to do with something I was writing, and I just sort of I got a couple books and just got a little more interested, and then met Joyce, and I'm still here.
Yay! You're staying for the party here. Preferred way of handling stress?
I think the body awareness I mentioned earlier is important, and just the kind of movement and exercise and finding a sort of center. For me, meditation is something that just sitting down and centering is the word that I would use. The part of stress that sort of spins me out is when there's too much in front of me, it's disorganized, and I just sort of tunnel into one aspect of it, and everything else is just sort of flying around all around me. You know, there's unread messages here. I'm not even sure what's in them. I'm not sure what the list of priorities of things that I'm working on is. I'm blocked up on something I am working on. I mean, those are the times when I just I step away, maybe take a nap, sit down for an hour or two, come back to it, work on something else maybe that's completely unrelated. And there's a point when stress tips into just sort of kind of collapse. I've experienced that in the past, and that's not a good place to be. I think that having strategies of recentering oneself, so that, because you can take, I mean, you're always getting pushed off the path in one direction or another, but as long as you keep taking steps back toward the path, you're not getting completely blown off course. When you sort of go, when the wind blows you off course and you sort of go with it, you can find yourself like you don't even know where the path is anymore. I'm also honest with people about it. It's people I'm working with. Hey, listen, I'm not doing anything right now. I'm on the verge of burnout, and I'm literally not doing anything, and you're paying me for it. So I'm just letting you know, just to get it off my conscience. But right now, there's nothing happening because you don't want to see me burn out. And some of them have seen me burn out, and they don't want to see that happen again. So,
yeah, Michael needs his naps. They're crucial. And so, does TI appear in your life?
It does. Joyce, give me started here. How does TI appear in your life? It's one of your preferred functions.
Well, for me, it comes out in being critical of things that don't make sense. So when someone says something and it's hypercritical of another statement they've said before, basically things that are not true said in concession.
Yeah, that doesn't bother me. The like hypocrisy and the sort of the cognitive dissonance and those kinds of things. Like, I don't feel like a sudden urge to resolve contradictions or anything like that. I mean, I have like intellectual principles. I have theories that I prefer over others. I usually try to put them to some use, and I don't cling to them. The image I'm getting in my head now is every time I've said something to an introverted thinker, and you just get that sort of like furrowed brow look, like, wait, what? And then I sit here like, oh my God, do you really want me to explain myself right now? And have to really scramble to come up with something sometimes. Mm-hmm. But I like taxonomies. I like drawing clean lines when they're needed. I think I love just reading the work of introverted thinkers, and I get a lot out of it. Very sort of impressive, systematic, precise kind of, philosophical work, whatever it may be. But I mean, I'm more like the facts or whatever the project is, whatever the thing I'm working on, I'll sort of shift my context of like what's true and what's not based on what's useful to that. So it's a more pragmatic kind of use of it, I guess.
What has been the hardest function for you to understand?
It depends on what we mean by understand, because like the hardest one to describe is introverted intuition, because that's just the perennial issue. It's just hard to sort of, it's the most background like function. The hardest to understand like in the world is extroverted feeling. I mean, even though like I understand, like I see when it's happening, but like something like, I mean, one of my sort of the kind of extroverted feeling that like drives me up the wall is just this sort of what I call the talk show variety of FE, which is like where like an audience will, act as a unit and like emote collectively and like laughing when they're expected to laugh, or expressing like approval or disapproval based on cues to the host. And sometimes you see the host who signals like, no, we don't agree with that. And then suddenly everybody sort of shifts. And this is the kind of nightmare scenario of extroverted feeling for me. Not to knock on the function, but like that's sort of like the first thing that comes to mind when I think of that. And when I'm in a situation like that and I tell myself like, just play along, like just not to stand out, just play along, I just can't do it. I can't even fake it.
Do you ever laugh to jokes you don't find funny?
Well, that's a different kind of thing. Like if somebody, if like to be polite, I don't know. Do I ever laugh because like just for the sake of like, because the whole room is like, if it offends me in some way, and I don't mean offends, well, if I find it depends on what kind of unfunny it is.
True. Any advice for INTJs in improving their interactions with ESTJs?
It's just don't be abstract. Don't be abstract. They could really, I mean, I work with some ESTJs, and I get, I have good interactions with them. They can have a pretty wicked like sense of humor. It's just don't be too abstract, and be just get to the point.
Nice.
And do what's like, if something's expected of you, like just do it well.
Mm-hmm. Jack asks, what would you say is weaker for you, FE or SI? Also, you say you're a 5-wing 4. What's your tri-type? We've answered this, but so my guess of Michael's tri-type right now is 5-4-1. Could be wrong. That's my guess.
Yeah, I mean, weaker. It's like all of these. I think I have improved my relationship with. Believe it or not, Joyce. I think all of these, but they're sort of, to the extent that they're a weakness, I would say that it's in a different way. Like for extroverted feeling, it's just more like just this sort of touching a hot stove sometimes, where it's like, okay, I know I don't know what this analogy is, but like I know I need to touch the stove for some reason. But it's like introverted sensation is that's more of like a creepy function to me, because it's just that's the one that I would say is really just feels like it's not there. And I would say that that's one that I have a hard time understanding. I mean, the measuring experience against past experience, or like having a lingering sense of something. I mean, these things turn up for me, but they turn up in like fragmented, like strange and kind of surreal ways. And I also don't have a connection with like, I don't have the kind of connection with the past. My mother's a introverted sensei. She's an ISFJ. And like, it's so different. And there was a point, I was walking through my old neighborhood recently, and past the house that I grew up in, and they had put the owners, we moved out of there, 15 years ago more. And the owner had put our old dishwasher on the curb for like trash collection. I walked by and I said, oh, it's my old dishwasher. That's weird. So I snapped a photo of it and sent it to a few of my family members, and they all are introverted sensate types. And it sparked all of these memories and all of this nostalgia and all of this stuff about the past and like where we grew up and all this stuff. And I almost like none of that. If something's in the past, it just feels kind of alien to me. And then when something does creep up, it's just kind of, it just seems odd. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the past is irrelevant, and so it's like, why? What concept or thought system helped you identify or clarify your type?
I didn't go back to Jung until later. I think at the beginning, I probably read Kiersey early on, and things around, floating. I've always been, I think, pretty good at getting around online and just finding like good sources of information. So Michael Pierce's videos were really good at nailing things down, and he's really, I like the way he thinks, and I like the way he like what he does. So it was really just a sort of a hodgepodge all over the place. Antonia and Joel over at Personality Hacker are really good at. Antonia is really good at actually just drawing a thread through different functions. So that's where Joyce and I met, and I think that was extremely helpful, their work, but it was really from all over the place.
Yeah, Personality Hacker brought us together. It was a personality boot camp for nerds who like psychology. And so how does any fifth slot appear in your life?
I'm really getting along well with people who prefer it.
You like your
it appears in the form of like almost all of my close friends. I think I can be, I think the sort of the spontaneity of like having a strong preferred extroverted kind of intuition is something that I don't have, where it's just on the spot. Like Joyce at the event that we were just talking about, just the extroverted intuitives, just like, just go run with this. And they'll just, there was one point where it was like, it was probably 5 or 6 of us, and there were 4 INTPs, ENFPs in the group. And then me and Bruce, the ENTJ, and me and Bruce, and it was like halfway through the session, I realized that me and Bruce were just sitting back with our arms folded and just listening to these 4, just bouncing this thing around. And at the very end, Bruce and I came in and just sort of, and then drew that, like just, you know, let's sort this out quickly, just with the material that we've got. And yeah, came in at the end. But when it comes to just that on the spot kind of intuition, no, I don't have that. When I get rolling with somebody, especially someone who does prefer that, then I can do it. But it's a long sort of warm up to get there, unless I'm really in sync with somebody and we're working on a specific project and there's been some thought that I've been able to put into it beforehand. So.
Yeah. Hi, rational typology. How much do you like, say, water on a kitchen bench bothers you?
It's the one thing that, like, I don't like water in the sink basin. I just don't like water splashed around. I just don't want it. I don't like just wet, damp, no. Yeah, like, it drives me insane. People who just like wash their face in the sink and there's just water splashed all over the place. No, that's a way to get it under my skin. Yeah. Yeah.
Don't mess with Michael's objects.
I like the sound of water. In all of its various forms. I like the sound of ice forming. I like the sound of ice breaking apart. I like the sound of rain. I like the sound of the ocean waves. I just don't like the thing around me. I like to put the sounds on the speakers and not have the actual, substance.
Yeah, those strong tertiary FI opinions. Oof. What helps you identify as a Jungian intuition dominant type?
I mean, I moved backwards through it. So I moved from the more generic kind of, the more generic type into the functions. And then it's just sort of, it was a matter of just weighing the functions against one another. And, does it make sense, this preference versus that one? And then also always considering, like, maybe this, even the 4-function model is too rigid. Like, maybe this sorts itself out in a different way, but it holds together pretty nicely. I mean, defining, especially introverted intuition, I mean, it's a a lot depends on just your theory of reality, because I made a video last year about introverted intuition. And I disagree with a lot of what I put in that video, but it was kind of an exercise to sort of put it together in the way that I did, because it's a lot of the descriptions of all of the functions, but including introverted intuition that you come across today, are very empirical, and they have to do with, taking it, they have to do with understanding functions as sort of information processing systems that are, very empirically based. So it's sort of taking, what's sometimes called the sensory and sort of putting it through this intuitive process. The Jungian, like Jung's approach, is the archetypal approach, where it's like, it sounds very woozy, of introverted intuition is in touch with the primal image, and it's a sort of very the collective unconscious, and there's this very mystical element to it. I think if you want, like, when it comes to metaphysics, I'm more on the Jung side of this, the sort of idealist side, than on this like physicalist, everything is empirically based side of things. But it's also the horizon of what you can know and what you can describe about a function or about any aspect of reality, if you fall on like the more idealist side of things, is much, much shorter. There's much, which is why it spins off into like the new age so quickly, or something like that. So something I'm still sorting through, and like, to what extent is it empirical, and to what extent are there, more sort of archetypal structures, and what does that mean? But yeah, in terms of how I came to identify, I just worked backwards from the type.
Yeah, so with type, a lot of times people talk about the behaviors of type, which is more of signs of the concept rather than the concept itself. The concept itself is more archetypical, or more about something way beyond something you could actually physically see. Yeah, and so Jung talks about the collective unconscious, and those would be the introverted functions, not just introverted intuition, but all introverted functions are a part of the collective unconscious. And all extroverted functions are part of the collective conscious. So it's on the opposite side. So FETE, SENE are part of the collective conscience. Conscious? My pronunciation is the best, clearly.
Yeah, and then you get into conscious versus unconscious, and there are many like layers of meaning in those, in those concepts as well. So that's another one that we could do a whole video.
Whole video, yes. And so, what are your thoughts on becoming better with intuition?
That's the interesting thing, because what I brought up earlier was active imagination, which again, it's with all of the cautions that come around this. If there's trauma, if there's depression, these kinds of things, like, it can be, and again, speaking from my experience, in my type, I'm not sure how far that extends. It could be just very boring and fruitless for other people. I don't know, but things can surface that are very disturbing. So all those caveats and everything, but that's actually, to get in touch with that, it's just sort of, meditation techniques are there to get in touch with the mind, but at the same time, like, there's a lot of sensory material there as well. Maybe come back to it. Let me think about that.
Yeah, one of the ways you can improve your intuition is through practicing guessing in a non-worst case scenario way. So as an ISTJ with repressed extroverted intuition, sometimes when you use your intuition, you might be more prone to go in the worst case scenario side. So maybe if you practice intuition, inference is guessing, but in a normal way without the worst case scenario thinking, that would be also stretching that intuition. And so,
yeah, and read fiction. That's always my advice to everybody. Read fiction. People are reading too much personal development. Read fiction.
Strong FI opinions by Michael. What cognitive function are you looking for improvement?
mean, all of them to some extent, I think. Yeah, those lower like shadow functions have improved extroverted sensation quite a bit. Again, that sort of body awareness, a lot comes from that, and it's just sort of general techniques of just getting out of your head. A lot of the time, those are effective. I've introverted feeling. I mean, it's been kind of a demon in the past, but I'm more the master than the servant as far as introverted feeling goes. So all of the sort of preferred stack functions, I feel pretty comfortable with now, at least relative to my experience in the past. Questions are coming too fast. I can't. There's too much happening. But those bottom shadow functions, extroverted feeling, introverted sensation, are really just the sort of, I feel like I need an exorcism or something, or like a reverse exorcism. I need those put in to draw that out. So those would be the two.
Makes sense. And so have you met a fellow INTJ in real life? How was it like for you? And
yeah, I've met type twins. Jasper, who I did a video with, I mean, we have different experiences. So obviously, everybody does, but just in terms of like when something turned up that needed to be addressed, it was, we went about it in startlingly similar ways. And I think when it comes down to different subtypes, et cetera, we line up pretty well. So that was what was good about the personality hacker event, because like there were so many like groups of different types that just, it's something that you want to take a skeptic into and just have them walk around the room and just be like, do you see how, this group and that group, I mean, it sort of justifies itself. But I've met several INTJs. Can be difficult to work with. We can like push, for some reason, when you get two of us together, we can push things into high gear a little more quickly than usual. Even like working with an ENTJ, I've never had that experience, but working with other INTJs, it's suddenly like, let's put the pedal to the metal and really tear through something, because, we tend to be on the same track, if not the same page. I mean, we might have different perspectives on things.
Yeah. Life Protocol asks, do you ever feel like you need to take a break from introverted intuition? And how do you do it?
Joyce, you want to take this first?
Yeah, so Michael's favorite answer, naps, or something to kind of relax yourself. There's sensory deprivation takes, ? Meditation. What are
that's the thing? Those put you deeper into introverted intuition, I think. Yeah, like that's all mind stuff, right? So it's that. Yeah, it's the body stuff. I think it's the body stuff. Do some qigong or something.
Yeah, that might work.
Which is, I mean, actually, yeah, like not in. I mean, it could be intense exercise and like intense physical exertion and all of this, but just like a sort of graceful, slow kind of movement, I think is a good exercise for getting out of the mind and staying in a kind of flow state. Because you can also, I mean, if you suddenly switch into high gear on the other side of the stack, that could also be kind of a whiplash experience too. How's the rest of the chat going? What's happening in there? I'm not looking at the rest of the chat, but I see Joyce making faces every once in a while.
It's a lot of people going like, hey, Michael, you're, and then a lot of compliments. So you would feel awkward if I read them out loud. So I did you a favor and I didn't read them out loud. And I guess one of the ways to improve NI is to be an SE in a controlled way. So somewhere you can actually like get into your physical body in a way that doesn't kill you, or maybe the almost killing you is needed to wake you up from being in your mind too much. And so Gilbert says, hi, Michael, you've made quite an impression on me, and you display a remarkable sensitivity and balance in your personality.
Oh, thank you, Gilbert.
To what do I owe this admirable development in your personality type preferences?
I mean, if you, I'll just give the honest answer, which is like more than a decade of just brutalizing myself with drugs and alcohol. And then coming out of that, not doing that, that's not how I develop my type, but coming out of that, you have a lot of work to do. And there's actually sort of a fire that's lit under you to do it. And you are forced to put yourself in the hands of other people and to take advice and to trust them. So that's the honest answer to that. Sorry to go again to 0 to 100 in one answer there, but but that's the truth.
Yeah.
Not that everybody, okay, let me be very clear. Not that everybody needs that experience. Not that I'm recommending that experience, but there was a movie that came out last year that I really resonated with called The Sound of Metal. And it's, I mean, it's a different situation, and I typed that character as an ISTP, but it's a very similar kind of process that one hit pretty close to home. That's really good. Streaming on Prime. Not much good has come out in the last couple of years, so that's a recommendation I can put out there. The Sound of Metal.
Yeah. I wonder if the hitting of rock bottom allows people to kind of be their truest self, because now that you've faced the worst, or you can't really be afraid of anything else that comes at you. Maybe.
I have an INFP friend who he says, I have so many vices, but none of them are extreme enough. I can't find my way to the bottom.
Blessing.
So you'll get there. Don't worry.
Darn, Michael. And so, what is something interesting you discovered today?
I'm going back to my day, and it's a blur. I think it's a good question. I have no idea. I have to. It's just a blur. So much. I learned something from everybody who's asking questions here. What's something interesting I discovered today? I did a lot of work today, so that's kind of a chore. Didn't really not much interesting there. I don't know. Flag it.
Sure. So Nexu asks, has learning about type and typology terms been useful for you in real life, or is it just an intellectual hobby for you?
Oh, super useful. Are you kidding me? It's like I didn't like the most useful thing wasn't in understanding myself. That's a portal. It's in what the hell's going on with everybody else. What is everybody else doing? I mean, you feel alienated if like you're sort of an oddball and you're wondering like something. What you do is you feel defective and you project that onto everybody else. Like something's wrong with everybody, and it just turns you into a misanthrope, I think. And understanding in terms that sort of just flattens everything to these that's why I like the broader systems that aren't like there's 1,000 types, whatever. It's just a very concise, sort of even measured, universally applicable kind of structure of the psyche that clarifies what the hell is going on with everybody. So it's made me a kinder, gentler, more compassionate person in general in real life. Also an intellectual hobby. I mean, it's you always, find some different facet or aspect of different functions and how they turn up, and some weirdness or some quirk or another. You find a really just off the wall, like goofball ISFJ or something. You're like, oh, that's cool. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well said. And so do you listen to Muse? I don't know who Muse is.
Yeah, no, I don't listen to Muse, but I worked in right out of high school. I worked like building things for a home improvement store and like building out new stores. And they had Muse on a constant rotation on the Muzak all day. every day and I wanted to die. And I hear it sometimes just spontaneously. It pops into my head. It's the one song, I think it's called Starlight. And I just want to die every time I think about it. But that's not to cast aspersions at the band. It's not their fault. It's the fault of Lowe's home improvement stores across the United States.
Oh, hot damn. And so what are your thoughts on physical health?
Yeah, what I've been saying this. I think it's extremely important. I think it's extremely important for all types. I think it's extremely important for Joyce and my types who have this sort of body unconsciousness that can sort of, you just a lot of times it's, it feels like the preference is just to be a mind floating in space and not to have to worry about this machine you're walking around in, but aligning those things and keeping in a kind of physical, like good shape and a good kind of flow, and finding some measure of like physical grace, like this much, is critical, I think, for like mind types,
Mm-hmm. Physical health is good for flesh suit maintenance. The flesh suit being...
I'm repulsed by that term.
Has there been a mental, emotional, conceptual improvement in certain aspects of your life after finding out about your type?
Yeah, I mean, looking into type coincided with a period of a lot of mental, emotional, and conceptual is a different thing, but a lot of different improvements. So it's hard to do a one-to-one kind of correlation of those things. But it's part of that journey. Conceptual improvement, yeah. I mean, just in like having those concepts,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not something that that's something you want to be too rigid about, I think, because you can't, I mean, like type fundamentalism is as bad as any kind of fundamentalism. There's a lot of different ways of looking at being. There's a lot of different ways of looking at what, the human situation is. So I not like endorsing any kind of fundamentalism, but it's like a major tool in the toolkit, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Making it be everything and the only thing might be dangerous, but it's helpful. That's a helpful thing. And so Sensors Uncensored, Brady asks, what are your thoughts on the 8-function model from BB? Do you think it holds up to scrutiny?
Oh, that's my friend from the SE videos. Yeah, I've seen my man before. Okay. What's his name?
Brady, what's
up, man? What are my thoughts on the 8-function model? This is another one where the fundamentalism comes in, but very useful for writing fiction, for like character design. You want to set it aside, I think, when you're actually writing, because it can be too deterministic. But I think in writing, it's extremely useful. In life, I don't see the I don't see that kind of consistency where it's like there are certain archetypal energies that are consistent across types. I think the bigger topic is that, like, it's the Jungian approach versus the Myers-Briggs approach. Like the Myers-Briggs approach, and it's kind of why Jung snubbed Briggs so hard and why he wrote a really like blistering preface to his book. The Myers-Briggs approach is that there's a type and you're stuck with it, and that's your type, and you develop your type and it doesn't change. Jung's approach, the individuation approach, is that not that type can change, but that it must change. So there are radical differences there. So I think the more sort of strict the system is, the more it sort of locks you into a certain state. And then there are questions of like biological determinism and all of this stuff. I prefer BB's model because it's more of an idealist model, and it has more to do with a sort of, I mean, there's a lot of room to maneuver within those kinds of archetypes, like the trickster and the Senex and all of these kinds of things. But I think more useful in the world of fiction for me. Yeah.
As an introverted NT,
this can be skipped.
Oh, okay.
Skip it. No, I'm just joking.
Do you ever struggle with neuroticism?
Wait, go back.
Okay.
Do I struggle with neuroticism? Yeah, I have. Yeah, I'm flattered that you would even ask that question.
You hate that water on your kitchen bench, I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, the answer is yes, but again, with that sort of, you finding techniques of finding balance, of getting out of your head, having perspective, which just comes from life experience as much as any kind of like learning, like technical learning. I'm a much calmer, much less neurotic person than I have been. Yeah.
How do I cheer up INTJs in both the personal setting and professional setting?
It depends. I think there's so many different varieties within every type. I mean, I like just joking around, but I've met some pretty severe kind of INTJs. I think cheer up. Does that presume that, Joyce, you're the extroverted feeler? How would you cheer up an INTJ?
You wait for them to cheer up. Sometimes when I try to influence an introverted into introverted person's feelings before they're ready, it's not always that effective. So sometimes I just wait for the cloud to pass. It's kind of like a weather cloud. You wait for the forecast to change. I try to cheer up INTJs maybe like by cleaning up the kitchen bench so there's no water there.
Mop up.
Do you believe in the paranormal?
I'm too grounded to just sort of spin off into sort of kind of just spontaneous kind of eccentricities and stuff. I think there's interesting things to learn from it. I mean, I like Jeffrey Mishlov's channel on YouTube. He has all of those people into his room and has conversations with them. You get a lot out of it. Like I mentioned before, I mean, I have a lot of issues with empiricism. I think we've gone way off the wrong track on physics, and we've defined like reality in terms of simply what is useful for the development of technology. And I think that it's there's a lot of talk in like paranormal circles about quantum physics and the implication of quantum physics. Actually, quite a bit. I've said this on another video. You don't want to be the person on the internet who's just spouting off about quantum physics. So I'm making a very just brief, like, simple point here is that take all of that with a lot of grains of salt, what the paranormal crowd would say about like quantum physics. But I would go so far as to say it's probably closer to the mark than what mainstream physicists are saying about quantum physics. And just general any trend in modern science right now, they're so far off on the wrong track, I feel like. So I have space for it.
Makes sense. And so what would you like to be known for?
I think it's I think it's kind of a prison, just any sort of like regard for reputation or anything. So I wouldn't even, I mean, ideally, the answer is not nothing, but it's not some sort of like vaulting ambition or anything like that, even though I do have those. So there's I would say it would probably be just, it'd probably be my more creative work, I would generally say, which I keep, that's sort of a different realm from, I keep my worlds pretty, they're kind of sectioned off, although who knows in the future, but that's what I'm most proud of, I guess, is that work. Joyce, what do you want to be known for?
Yeah. Well, like you said,
helping people.
the ego is a prison. So wanting something is that. I guess I want to
Desire nothing. That's the advice. Desire nothing. Sorry, go ahead.
What would you want to be known for? I want to be known for someone who left a lasting impression on someone. I really value being irreplaceable, I guess, to the one person or to the people that I care about. Yeah. So finding a way to leave a permanent impression on someone's heart. Your take on INTJ and empathy in a societal sense of the meaning?
Joyce, how do you read that societal sense of the meaning?
I guess empathy, as in, do you feel what someone else is feeling? Like, when I look at you in horror and pain, do you feel the horror and pain?
See, I don't necessarily, I mean, I don't see that as like, do I understand it and do I have compassion for it? I don't feel it. I don't feel it unless we're really resonating and we're just happen to be in the same like place, you know. But I think see, it's funny because when I see societal sense, it's like what I don't like is what I see is just everybody. What happened in Afghanistan a couple weeks ago is tragic. It's awful. The images were awful. The reason that there was such outrage about this is because we saw the images, but we haven't seen images coming out of Afghanistan over the last 10 years. We didn't see images coming out of Yemen. We didn't see images, you know what I mean? So I feel like there's a lot of just social empathy is so driven by social media, news media, and whatever's sort of whatever's given to us. That's sort of it's more dictated to us than it is driven by like what I feel like would be a healthy sense of empathy coming from a society. That's without going into too controversial territory. That's as sort of close as I'll get to that one.
Yeah, it's true. People find it hard to empathize unless there's a story attached to it in some way, like through pictures or through someone telling it. And that's because sometimes it's easy to abstractify things and become detached to issues if you don't have a personal tie to it as people in general. So Katie asks, have you ever been described as predictable? Do you think you are? All right, guys. So Michael's wardrobe is predictable. He has like different shades of black in different clothing. But I wonder, Michael, what are your thoughts?
I want to take my camera to the closet right now and really, I could really nail that one down. I think, yeah, I've been described as predictable in the sense of like the routines I have, I stick to. I wish less so, to be honest. I mean, and I think I can't even say that. The answer is yes, and yes. Although, I mean, that's yeah. But eccentric, predictable, but eccentric, I would say.
That sounds about accurate.
Eccentric in my predictability.
Can type be applied to a larger grouping of people, and do you apply that process to your fiction? Say like INFJ Wizards, INFP Warriors, ENTP Nation?
Well, I think the question about fiction is interesting because what's useful about type and fiction is what you want in sort of character and story design is conflict. And what type gives you is it gives you these functions that each can conflict with the other in a different way, and there's different significations of each function that conflict with others. So the answer is yes. I mean, in anything, like it could be a good spur to like imagination, and astrology works in the same way, significations and aspects of planets and getting those gears turning. In terms of like like a type of a nation, yeah, and you can also be more broad about that too, which would be, nations preferring certain functions over others, or being more extroverted or more introverted. I mean, it's it can be clarifying, I think. I don't think in those terms too often, but it can be clarifying, definitely in fiction writing.
Absolutely.
Or interpretation. Yeah.
Do you find more in common with other INTJs or other 5-wing-4 types?
There's some INTJs I feel like we were separated at birth, and there are some, like with any type, that I feel just have a different sense of how the world works and just different priorities. So I mean, in terms of other 5-wing-4 types, I mean, there's something common to all of us fives. I mean, we just like to be alone and just have a lot of information all around us. You know what I mean? So type to type, yeah. But there are other types that I feel pretty close to, pretty consistently. ENTPs, I think, as my shadow type, I feel close to. I feel a very strange bond with ISFJs. I think it might be a function of having an ISFJ mother, but I don't know. It's not something I would have expected when I first started learning about type.
Makes sense.
Considering we share no preferences and they're all thrown in completely different order, and maybe that's the thing,
Yeah. So personal thoughts on Jung's individuation process. Are you in pursuit of it personally?
Yeah, I'm doing a series right now on my channel about psychological types, and it's all about the individuation process. And it's it's a difficult one because Jung, especially and it's funny how this works out, especially in the first half of his career, it had a lot to do with reputation. He was extremely guarded about his reputation, and he hid the ball a lot of the time. So you really have to read between the lines of what he's writing in the earlier to mid-career work. I think he really cut loose toward the end. The writings on alchemy, on synchronicity, on, if you read The Answer to Job or something, he sort of, let his hair down a little bit. And especially when you see the stuff that's just been published in the last couple of decades that he really kept to a very small circle of people, like the Red Book and the Black Books. You get a better sense of first what his type is, but also where he was coming from. In terms of the individuation process, he was pretty explicit that this was a process for the second half of life. I think it's essential to pursue that. I think it's very long, slow, and kind of brutalizing work to reconcile. I mean, what it is reconciling consciousness with the unconscious, with all of those things that are just sort of lurking down there and contradicting and haunting and nagging at everything else that's at the surface or closer to the surface. So it's systematic work. It has a lot to do with working with mentors who are very spiritually sound and doing the work. So, I mean, the answer is yes, but in terms of who achieves like whatever the achievement is, you know what I mean? It's something worth pursuing. Otherwise you're stuck in personality, you're stuck in type. You want to be as whole as you can be, I think, when it comes to the end.
Yeah, Jung calls your personality type an imbalance. So the individuation process is to balance out your personality, almost so it's not as extreme as that you can type it. So Valentine asks, what, or rather, how do you deal with the dark aspects that INTJ brings?
Writing, sublimation. I mean, it doesn't go for all types, but I think especially with introverted, intuitive thinking types, I think there's a pessimism that can come along with that. And I think not sort of tumbling into the abyss is you see that the key is have, and this is, I don't know if this is a brutal answer, but like, just have your eyes peeled for others who don't manage those things and see what happens to them, because that'll be your fate if it typically doesn't end well if you really collapse into that. I always feel drawn back toward that though, a little bit. So it's something to always keep an eye on. I think keeping an eye on it and always being sort of taking the measure of am I, and it comes out of too, if anybody's had the experience of just falling into like really deep depressions, like periods of depression, and coming out of those and then falling back into them again. And then if you have cycles of those, you can see, I mean, hopefully, you don't experience that, but if you do, the early signals of that can be, you can catch them, you can have an eye on them, and you can have, the important thing is having strategies to sort of pull out of that, catching it in time. So.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm looking for questions. It sounds like you find the John Beebe model helpful. What about it is helpful for you?
Well, I mentioned it's most helpful in writing fiction. So it's clarifying those, anything that has to do with sort of, see, it's funny because it goes two ways. There's the sort of, there's the more, what I'd say is fundamentalist side of this, which is the very formulaic kind of hero's journey kind of approach to these kinds of things. And then there's a much more open kind of, curiosity about, what are you laughing at? What's going on? Is it the chat?
Yeah.
I lost my train. I lost my train of thought.
Continue. I'm sorry. I was just thinking about whether.
What did they say?
They asked, "Hey Michael, one more question. Do you have a romantic partner? If so, what type? If not, what type are you looking for?"
Oh, it's up on the screen.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. No, no, Len. I think what type are you looking for? No, I don't look for a specific type. I mean, I think of types that I dated an ESFJ once, for God's sake. I think it was an interesting experience. We still get along all right. It's just, I've mostly been with, mainly NFP. I dated another INTJ once. It was a good relationship. It was great. It was totally self-absorbed for both of us, but it was like one big ball of self-absorption. It was great.
True. Yeah. Interesting.
I never told her. She wasn't. This is when I was in. We didn't have conversations about type. This was very early on, and I was like, "Huh, it's interesting that happened."
Yeah, that's funny. It's quite ironic.
But there's nothing wrong with that. You don't hear that too often coming up. Is people ending up with the same type? It's like you have tremendously different experiences. Sorry, I cut you off.
Oh yeah, I just find it ironic because like the chat's like filled with compliments, and Michael, you're like feel uncomfortable around compliments, and then I'm the INFJ who wants people to compliment me in the side chat, but no one ever compliments me. It's ironic.
Funny how that works out sometimes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What type is your partner in crime?
Partner in crime. Do we mean just on an abstract level? Like what type, or do we mean like best friends or what? I mean, I don't, partner in crime. A lot of my closest friends are INFPs, to be honest. My best friend of like 20 years is an INFP. It's probably a type that I get along with, I get on with the most. I mean, in terms of types I've actually done like committed crimes with, it would be ISTPs. And ESTPs. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's going back though.
Mm-hmm. How do you differentiate between dominant NE versus NI? Likewise, inferior SE and SI.
Dominant NE and NI. I mean, the speed is a factor of how much time it takes to like who's catching up with who, you know, is kind of the question. I think it's always a good partnership, because one is just like extroverted intuitive types tend to be much better at getting things started and having just a lot of material at once. Introverted intuitive types are better at just tunneling through all of that and drawing something out of it. So it's always that back and forth between those two. It's, I need more. Oh, we have too much. Wait, let me take this, you know? So speed is a factor there. And likewise, inferior SE versus SI. So inferior SI, so we're looking at NE dominant types. There's like, I mean, they seem to be really just terrorized by, like, I don't know, doing their taxes and stuff, you know, and they tend to, there tends to be a sort of that just on an emotional level, they tend to, what I've found in just SI inferior types that I know, they tend to just anchor emotion in a place, and you have to move them out of the place to sort of clear and things clear up. But like to see that thing start to spin out of control, it's like watching someone get just sucked back into a vortex or something. I don't know. Inferior SE is just like, I don't know, walking into walls and just like being overwhelmed by questions popping up on a screen.
Yeah, I'm clearly trying to terrorize you. So do you detach from emotions in the moment and process later?
INFP, I'm having trouble understanding this idea of detaching from feelings as I feel in the moment. Yeah, I have no problem doing that. It's not always great unless I pocket them and specifically say that. I mean, in the moment, my question is, what's happening here? What's effective and useful at this moment? It's like if I blow my top and start and lose my temper, like I feel like I want to, maybe is that going to get us anywhere? And if not, then I'm pretty good at just keeping just stone faced and just taking that away. Typically it goes away. So if it's a negative emotion, it'll typically go away. It's sort of like, I mean, it's like road rage or something, you know, if someone cuts you off in traffic, there's a momentary, like, if you don't lean into that, then it's gone. But as soon as you just lean forward just a little bit into it, then it's just there and it's got a hold of you. If it doesn't go away, then you can just hold it inside and crash out, or you could find a productive way to deal with it. And sometimes that has to do with, you know, apologizing to somebody or something, you know, but more of that processing time is something that I don't find it difficult to sort of step back from it in the moment and take that away. But that's just, I mean, that's not a pro or a con. That's just sort of a function of like function preference, I think. Keeping a clear head in general, I think is good though, to not get dragged around by anything, because then you're sort of, Joyce, you keep chuckling.
Isn't a girl allowed to smile? Gosh.
Hold it in, pocket it. No.
Are you asking for constipation?
What about you, Joyce? Do you find, like, do you hold, I'm wondering to what extent this is a function of intuition and to what extent it's a function of extroverted thinking.
Yeah. So I find it easy to detach from my perspective, so I can see a situation beyond how I see it, and I can kind of see how everyone kind of sees it, and then I kind of build an image of how this situation is overall from that. So I'm detached in that way, like having a bird's eye view or kind of detached lens towards things. But in terms of emotion, like when I'm in the moment with someone and I'm feeling it with them. So it's intense as it's happening in the moment. But when I go back on my own, it becomes more detached. So when I'm not around people, I'm like in kind of like an analyze-y state, almost in like a TI-ish state. So that's how I go through it.
Yeah, I think like that's where, even though you're a feeling type and you're an extroverted feeling type on top of that, it's like there's a quality of our dominant function that's always abstracting. So that lag is always there, you know? I mean, if you really get it, like if you're not in control of that, just speaking for myself, that introverted feeling, then, and that just gets like someone just throws a dagger through that all of a sudden. And it's like where then there could be like an immediate spontaneous reaction. I saw that a lot when I was younger. I could still hold it in, but it was more difficult.
Makes sense. And so are you interested in biology in the natural world?
Two different questions, I think. Biology, yeah, there's a and this goes back to earlier comments about just our sort of approach to science in the last couple hundred years, that there's a kind of determinism that came up, especially with Darwin. I think with Darwin, that's when sort of biology became the like the prominent science. And even now, it's sort of a lot of different fields of science are evolutionary X. So evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, which is sort of, I mean, all of this, this goes to like the Jordan Peterson style of just sort of evolutionary pragmatism and all of this. It's not my thing. I'm not interested. So to the extent that it's like biological determinism, I think biology is an image of a process. So like if you look at the brain, I don't think anything is being generated by the brain. I think the brain is a reliable image of a process. It's what the process looks like to us. I think we tend to look at it backwards though. So in terms of like the mainstream, like biological sciences, when it comes to, oh yeah, especially when it comes to like the brain or when it comes to genetics, I think we're off track in those, and it bleeds into so many different aspects of the culture in general that it's not my vibe. The natural world, yeah, no, I love like hiking and getting out there I like deserts. Give me in the dry heat. It's humid out here today in Western New York, and it's just I feel like hell. I feel just damp. This goes back to my friends at Rational Typology, is that dampness, just damp. I feel like my skin is damp, my brain is damp. Sorry, go on. What is this?
Damp.
What's next?
And so do you disassociate?
Hell yeah.
If so, how much do you correlate this to feeling experience to NI, and how much do you attribute it to your body coping with stress?
There was a period when I wasn't doing well, and I was doing my best to do better, and I would really just be third person kind of out of body, just not there. And that's a kind of a pathological thing in general. That body, I keep going back to this answer, but that body awareness is important, and it's something that needs to be, there needs to be technique behind it. It's not something that's spontaneously there. So I think spontaneously, yeah, I will tend to sort of abstract into just sort of not being there, especially if there's a lot going on around me. Like pull me into a loud club or something, and I'm just not there. I don't know, Joyce, if you feel similar. I assume there's got to be something there that not at all.
Oh no, I agree. So
Oh.
I'm like, yeah, nah to those things that you're mentioning. I also think disassociation has to do with trauma too. Sometimes you'll disassociate from your body if you've been traumatized tenfold. So that's also another thing. But yeah, all those SE things are tough stuff that you mentioned.
I mean, I love them in private if I'm in control of all of these different mechanisms. It's great. I love just make it loud. You hit me with the strobe lights, all of the stuff. But as soon as it's like that plus crowds, hell no. Yeah.
Yes. I'm trying to find questions. So what do you think of objective personalities work, and how does it relate to typology? Masculine and feminine functions, the animals, 512 types, jumpers.
Touched on some of this already. I think it's not for me, but I'll be charitable to them. I think they've done quite a bit, and I think their system does hold together on their terms. It's another case of this kind of empiricism of like this data numbers tables. It's not that I wouldn't tag this to one function or another. It's just more of a overall perspective on like, how are you, like, what's your orientation toward the world? I mean, this is where I can't get worked up anymore, because I'd just be ranting all the time, because it's like, this is the dominant thing still, is this kind of empiricism. I mean, I'm a romantic, and it's completely opposed to the sort of empirical approach. There's two completely different ways of orientations toward the world. It's like the empirical approach is you are a blank canvas, and whatever it might be, some factors outside of your control, the world is painting onto the blank canvas of you. And the romantic approach is the world is a blank canvas, and you express onto the world, you paint onto the canvas. It's just completely, they're irreconcilable. So I think that's the approach. I think the issue is one thing I would say, and this is just a matter of taste and perspective too, which is when you delineate that many subtypes, then the system becomes more and more deterministic. So what you find, I think, in objective personality is that you'll find they lean in and then pull back. They do this a lot, where they'll lean into a sort of like Voltology-esque approach, because what you'll see is like, look at our chart. Isn't it interesting that Ben Stiller looks like Sam Harris, and but they happen to be the same type, and there's that kind of thing. But we've done this a lot, and this is not for the beginners. And they always have those kinds of caveats and stuff, but that always sends a sort of a signal that's just, there's something fundamental that's beyond type where we don't meet. So it has nothing to do with their system, because again, I think it's coherent. I think it holds together. It's just that there's, on a more fundamental level, that there's a disconnect between how I approach these things and how they do. And that doesn't just go for them. I don't want to just pick on them. I mean, it's a lot of systems. I don't know, Joyce, how you feel about it.
Yes, my FE will refrain from saying a controversial opinion.
Not throwing shade on them. Again, I'm trying to just this my diplomacy coming in. I'm not interested in doing that sort of thing. Yeah.
Cool. Do you worry about saying or making mistakes? When it happens, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, I think this is sort of the I think it's important for everybody to, and I have a lot more to say about this, but I think it's important for everybody to sort of find what narrative governs your life. What's the story that you're telling yourself over and over and over again so much that it's just at such a low frequency that you don't even see it. So for me, it's that I do worry about making mistakes. I worry about like revealing that I have any faults at all. So what my coping mechanism is for that is to rigorously stage manage everything, and again, I have a lot more to say about this, but coming to realize that, which wasn't too long ago, and really nailing that down as the issue, is an incredibly clarifying thing. So the honest answer is yes, but there's also a gift that comes out of, that springs from that. And shout out to my friend Russell Sturgis, who writes who writes about this topic. He just published a book. He just published a book about the Marseille Tarot. It's called The Spiritual Roots of the Tarot, and it's sort of a it's a Gnostic approach to like the Marseille trump cards, and he lays them out in a specific way that sort of tells this story that I'm struggling to tell right now about what's important and what the proper path of life is. So that's something that I would recommend. But the answer is yes, and it's a neurotic thing. It's also a gift, and then striking a balance between those things and shifting from one perspective to the other is, I think, useful work for anybody to do.
And so what do you think the universe is? What do you think about the possibility of the universe being simulated by some sort of computer?
I think the tradition I'm closest to is the I mean, it's definitely the idealist tradition. So it would be, I mean, the universe would be mental fundamentally. And in terms of a simulation, I guess it can be fun to think about, but I think things. See, the funny thing about the interesting thing about science these days, to go back to this topic, is that we've taken the one thing that we have direct access to, which is just experiential consciousness, and it's the one thing that isn't allowed in sort of mainstream like theories of everything now. It's the one thing that has to be done away with. If you read, like, especially the most fundamentalist kind of writers on this, like Daniel Dennett, it's consciousness is just like the one thing, experience, that we have direct access to is a total illusion. So it would be the opposite of that, is what I think, is that that's the only thing that we can say with any certainty, that any amount of certainty that there is. What happens if you don't accept that, and if you accept if you accept what's the more mainstream stance on like what the universe is today, then you spin off into what you find in a lot of this mainstream kind of science, which is, many worlds theory of quantum mechanics and all of this stuff, which is so insane. It's the most ridiculous. Many worlds is the most ridiculous, least parsimonious explanation of anything that anyone has ever come up with, ever, by far. And it's a mainstream view of like what reality is now. So you can have either the like the sort of Joe Rogan Experience response to something like that, and just be like, far out, that's crazy that's what the mathematics says. Or what I tend toward is more, okay, well, maybe everything isn't fundamentally mathematical, maybe it's fundamentally experiential, and maybe that's a path that we should at least pursue. So that's, there's no way to come to any conclusions on that, and you spin off into, again, a lot of sort of paranormal stuff that just I'm too skeptical to just embrace wholeheartedly. But it makes more, I mean, as little sense as it makes, it still makes more sense than, a lot of, than the majority of the mainstream explanation of these things, as the mathematics just gets more and more bonkers, and we can't even take care of I won't go into the virus. But the simulation is, it's kind of a Gnostic thing that I don't, it's just, I'm not partial to it, just because that's sort of, I really have to do work to sort of pull myself into that frame. But I think a lot of that has to do with just generally me being, just generally having not the best and most optimistic feelings about technology. So I can't imagine a civilization developing Because I mean, the idea that there's someone doing the simulation, so that technology exists, right? To simulate a universe like this. I just can't imagine a situation where technology would advance that far without destroying itself and everything around
it. Yeah, sounds.
I just found a hard time with it. Yeah.
That is logical. And so how do INTJs see altruism and its utility?
Well, you should ask my favorite INTJ of the 20th century, Ayn Rand, how INTJs see altruism and its utility. Yeah, some of them see it as hideous evil, and some of them have, you know, some human fiber in them and can see, you know, altruism as being a virtue. What I am kind of opposed to is just the very rational kind of utilitarian calculation of utility, and, you know, just these sort of what is very extroverted thinking, kind of cost benefit, very abstract cost benefit analyses of things. I think it's I think being altruistic is a virtue. Yes, I think socially it's more complex, and it has to do with like what kind of values we actually do promote in a culture, and it's definitely not that.
Yeah. You mentioned you're an author. What was the first book you ever loved and has inspired you to write?
Oh boy. I mean, my favorite book is probably Don DeLillo's White Noise, just in terms of like sheer enjoyment of a novel. I think it's the funniest thing I've ever written. I think it's just sharp. It still holds up. I just reread that a couple months ago. I've read it 10 times. I don't know. I read it almost every year. Hilarious book. Recently, Hilary Mantel's books, the Wolf Hall series, which is about Thomas Cromwell in the court of Henry VIII, one of the best drawn characters I think Cromwell is I've ever read. War and Peace, which has the reputation of being extremely long, is also such a breeze that you can read that, like, it's more of a breeze than books that are a third its size. And if you want a book that has like perfectly, like a parade of perfectly observed types, that's the one. Like Tolstoy's the master of that. And Shakespeare, I think probably the earliest would have been like Shakespeare's The High Tragedies. Antony and Cleopatra is probably maybe the best thing ever written.
Yeah, strong.
Those are some recommendations.
And do you think there's a particular reason for the proportions of each MBTI type in society?
That's a really interesting question. I have no idea, to be honest. I mean, I have no idea a lot. I mean, this is the nature versus nurture thing again, too. And, you know, one question is how far back can you go in history and still draw these distinctions between types and functions? Because Jung is pretty clear, I think, in Psychological Types. I think it's chapter 2. It's the chapter on Schiller, that you could say it's a modern phenomenon. It's a phenomenon of the modern mind. So like going back and saying, you know, Aristotle was an ENTJ or something wouldn't even hold, because it depends on how you look at, like, what's your theory of civilizations? Is it one story that just marches forward, like one story of humanity that just marches forward, or is it cycles of civilizations that are fundamentally different from one another? And we're trapped in this cycle that we call the West right now, which is just sort of dominant over everybody, like whether they like it or not right now, you know? And that's a question that everyone needs to answer for themselves.
Am I the only INTJ who's really attracted to ESFPs?
No, are you kidding? No, absolutely not.
Makes sense.
I love the ESFPs. I don't know if everyone relates to their, like, you know, upside down type or whatever we want to call it, but like I get along famously with ESFPs. I think a mature INTJ and a mature ESFP can be the best of friends. You know, certain variation of our types are oil and water. So
yeah. ESFPs, everyone's eye candy. I'm kidding. Do you often play around with multiple perspectives?
Oh yeah. I think all the time. All the time. And especially, I mean, going back to just writing, I mean, that is writing characters. I get actually extremely, that's why that's why I'm doing this series on my channel now, is just, it's going to be a couple weeks before I get back to that, but it's to balance it out with the other thing I'm working on now, because when I worked on this thing a couple years before lockdown for a couple of years. And then I get to the point where I get extremely wrapped up in it and I sort of start to lose my sense of proportion. So, but the answer is yes. Joyce, how would you answer that question though? Because I'm answering as a writer.
Yeah, I think that with multiple perspectives, all intuitive functions look at differing perspectives because they're non-sequential. So all intuitive functions operate out of sequence, and so they make really interesting connections between things because you go from A to Z to F to E to J to G, and that creates like an interesting, quirky, eccentric perspective. So in a way, NE and NI in people are eccentric and multiple perspectives.
I mean, in a lot of ways, it's sort of it's the stereotypical like INTJ sort of philosophical stance. I mean, if you look at I hate to bring them up, but if you look at Nietzsche, the perspectival approach to just sort of everything, I mean, it was a kind of this earth-shattering thing, but it's totally on brand for type, and then that pushes through the 20th century. But yeah. Yeah.
What gifts do you think INTJs bring to the world? What do you think are the INTJs' superpowers?
Joyce?
Oh, me? Well, I think that they offer their ability to Michael, would you like to answer? I mean, like, maybe it's a more personal question, and then I'll chime in. My brain is so tuned out today. Had a really interesting day. So sorry about the slowness.
I think getting us to open up, or if like once we've sort of allowed ourselves to open up, then I think it's just that, I mean, this isn't better or worse, but we always have a different perspective on something, and there might be a lot of turmoil going on in a situation. And I feel like, just judging by my own experience and just others, I know of my type that we don't tend to lose perspective quickly, and I think we can offer that, like, just a sort of more of a meta perspective on situations. I don't know. I have a hard time. This feels like complimenting myself. It's just
either way, you're gonna feel awkward because then I'm gonna be complimenting you. So I think what INTJs bring to the world is maturity. So a mature perspective. I feel like NI allows them to kind of have an aged perspective, like aged cheese, and so they help kind of bring insight and maturity on the human condition or ideas or life itself. In some way, bring a broader perspective of an overall context. And yeah, their FI allows them to stay true to themselves. So when they have a strong opinion or strong preference, they're more comfortable with saying it. I think that's a superpower because it allows you to truly state what you feel on certain topics when everyone else is censoring themselves. And so this uncensored approach you take is truly admirable.
I mean, I try to keep it pretty diplomatic on Type Talks, but yeah, I mean, we don't tend to get dragged around by the crowd. I think it would be something that I think of as, I mean, self-serving, but I think of as positive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What makes you feel serene? Do you hold anything in reverence?
Reverence. Joyce, what do you revere?
Hold in reverence? My soulmate that isn't in my life.
Yeah, same. That's good. That's a good answer. Yeah, we both have idealized soulmates. Yeah, that's good. What makes me feel serene? I think it's abstract, but that sense of balance, which could be present. I mean, things could be calm, things could be really raucous and turbulent, but like striking a sort of being centered is having a technique for that. And again, this advice to INTJs: you're not going to Zen your way into it. It feels like it, but that's just going way up into the mind. It's got to be in the body. It's got to be in the body.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever experimented with cognition, for instance, not just leaning into, but leading with something like FE or SI? Did you ever try to become a different type? Will yourself into another
Only
type?
in the privacy of my own imagination. Yeah. It's extremely difficult. Doing something like that for me would be extremely difficult. And I think a lot of that has to do with introverted feeling. I think a lot of times that third preference just sort of tugs at you, and it won't let you get away from it. And anything that doesn't feel right, even if it's like artifice or a mask that you're putting on, I think I'm generally better. I feel like I'm better at telling actors what to do than being one myself. I think, yeah.
I've wanted to try that. And so what is something you're passionate about?
Movies. And there's nothing coming out lately. There's nothing. Give me something. These last 2 years have been, this lockdown killed an art form, and it's killing me, dying. I just saw The Card Counter. I think I wouldn't recommend that to everybody, but that was interesting. I watched The Green Knight a couple months ago. It's another one that was interesting. I wouldn't recommend that to everybody. If you haven't read Sir Gawain and The Green Knight, I would not go and see The Green Knight, but if you have, I would. Anyway. Oh, here we go.
Mm-hmm.
What films do I love? Knights of Cabiria. I think Terrence Malick's Badlands. Trying to think of things that are more appropriate. I don't want someone coming back in the comments in a month saying I traumatized them with some recommendation or another. I just mentioned the card counter. I think recently, First Reformed was something that with Ethan Hawke was something that I thought was. I've watched that a few times. I thought that was extremely powerful, well observed. INFJ character, intense, but really. Spiritually sound piece of work. Amadeus is right up there, close to the top. I could watch Amadeus on a loop. Passion of Joan of Arc, Blue Velvet, for sure. Bergman's Cries and Whispers, everything by Tarkovsky. Cache, Michael Haneke's Cache, good INTJ. I got to throw in a good INTJ recommendation. Anyway, those are a few.
Those are amazing films.
If anyone either wants to just blow their minds or bore themselves to tears, depending on who it is.
Yeah, if you want to glimpse into Michael's mind, go watch those films. Those 2 years were hard for lots of people. Were you one of them? If so, how did you deal with it?
Yeah, not at first, because I mean, it's a blessing and a curse, because it's like, at first, I mean, who's better prepared to live in absolute isolation for a lengthy stretch of time, just in terms of immediate impact? No. In terms of long-term impact, yeah, it's just, I mean, it's been anyone who says, I have questions for anybody who said it hasn't been just kind of a nightmare this last 2 years. And it's like, where are we going here? I have a lot to say about this, but again, diplomacy. I have the best conversations about this, by the way, with just for the record, with ESTPs. We can really cut loose on these kinds of things.
Oh, thanks, Valentine. We'll get Michael a new film with that money. What is the least scientific knowledge belief you accept in your life as true, and why?
Well, I mean, I think I've said a lot about like empiricism over this just the sort of modern kind of going back to, if I'm reading the question right, I mean, going back to Descartes, the idea, I mean, fundamentally, the idea is that reality is it's just abstract mathematics out there. We have no access to anything except through reason and mathematics. I think this is just the source of most of our problems today, is that idea. And it's just, and you see you generally see the upshot of this sort of thing with like what technology has brought us and what everybody says. And I agree with this. I mean, it's fine that, look at all of the medical advances. You're not, dying at 35 of your teeth anymore, and that's all true. But every one of those advances, every single one, has been a Trojan horse for the worst thing. So that's the dialectic of technology, is one is inextricably bound to the other. So every advance has brought something equally sinister on the other side, and things are starting to sort of things are really out of balance right now. And the idea that we're going to technology our way out of this problem, that Elon Musk is going to develop some kind of magic battery that suddenly we don't need, these limited quantities of fossil fuels anymore, is insane. It's absolutely insane. But it's again, it's the Joe Rogan, far out kind of experience, is all of this stuff. That's why I don't have much patience for like the very the conversations about the singularity. I'm skeptical about ever, getting to that point.
What are your thoughts on the way stories are told in books versus how they're told in movies? What strengths and weaknesses does each medium bring? Also, your thoughts on 1917?
Okay. Oh boy. Yeah, I think So I think the person who killed storytelling in movies is Carl Jung, and this is why it's the reason I don't call myself a Jungian. I think his work on type is brilliant. I think a lot of his work is brilliant. I think his work on myth is trash. And I think, it obviously led directly to Joseph Campbell. And what Joseph Campbell led to was the sort of hero's journey style of writing for film, which is the formulaic style of, blockbuster storytelling, but it's crept into even like, into all facets of like storytelling. So I think it's very thin. I think of all those people, I have long rants that I go off on like, screenwriting gurus and stuff. I mean, these people are as much as I have to say about like physicists, it's nothing compared to what I have to say about these people. It's just absolute poison. Robert McKee is a really good writer on story, actually, and he's one of the most prominent of these people. He's actually very good on this. So I think in terms of just classical storytelling, I think following those principles is, and then that goes through like The Godfather and Amadeus, and those are all classically told stories. What strength and weaknesses does each medium bring? I mean, in books, you can just, I mean, you can, the problem with film is you need to make it happen. So there's already a horizon of what you can, I mean, it's far out there, and there are very innovative filmmakers, but there's a limit to what you can do because it's so dependent on money and time. And in books, you can just go anywhere. So I like those big, long, just sort of sprawling kinds of stories, like War and Peace, or like, I mean, on the bonkers end of things, Gravity's Rainbow is one of the last section of that book is just like, it's sublime. It's almost like a psychedelic experience reading that book. Thoughts on 1917? Yes. I think it's the best thing Sam Mendes has done. I think Roger Deakins is a genius, and it looks great. I think I don't give it the full 5 stars, but I give it a solid 4 out of 5 stars and a recommendation.
Back to the superpower question. Nick said, INTJs make me feel like I'm emotionally expressive. It's their superpower.
Oh, Nick's here. Hey, Nick.
That's really funny. Ability to be an iconoclast. And what do you think of DMT experiences? You can ask questions too, Michael, if you want.
No. I think so the whole issue of psychedelics is like I try to be okay. Again, I'm going to try to be charitable as someone who has a lot of experience with this that's far in the past. I can say that in terms of what insight it brings you, it's extremely limited, because what it does is it opens a door for you, but all it does is open that door again and again and again and again and again. And I mean, everyone's experience is their own experience. What I think the value of it is, and you can even grasp this intellectually. You don't need to do an isolation tank or have a DMT experience or go on a shamanic journey or something like that. The insight is that with just a tweak, your entire sense of the stability of the world collapses, and it's just like a slight turn. So if that doesn't raise questions about what is, like, there are people who would say that, like, this here, this is a bottle and it's just, we have the empirical, this is the very sort of British kind of empirical, just hardcore empirical tradition where we have the world out there, it writes onto us, it's what it writes on us is accurate, the representations are accurate, and we have access to what these objects are. I think anyone who's had an experience on, and it's not just psychedelic drugs, but just any number of them, will give you that testimony that, again, with just a tweak, you can prove that wrong. Do I recommend doing that? Not really. I just told you there, to take my word for it. Extrovert, intuitive, dominant types seem to get a lot out of this, though. So I don't want to make that a blanket statement across types. Yes.
Was there someone who played a huge influence in your life, and what was their MBTI type?
I think following on that, I mean, what you following on the last answer, I think if you have come out of an experience that's of addiction, but also insert whatever else here that would hold, then if you enter community with others who've been through that experience and have gotten through it, then you meet people of all types who've been affected by it, and you have something to learn from all of them. And that's something that I mean, if I were to point to anything that, you know, type is a fundamental, it would be that, because there are currents of experience and attitudes outside of the Jungian attitudes that are also at play. And there are threads that cut across different types. So without naming names, because that's not what we do, I would point to just a vast anonymous group of people of all different types who've just sort of bottomed out at some point and then saw through to the other end of that.
What is your technique to stay motivated and to get out of the NI-FI loop?
I get the fuck out of the apartment. Get out of the house. Get out of the house. Talk, just go, like, just strike up a conversation with somebody. That's the worst, is just being locked inside, locked in your mind, and just not just spinning those wheels. At that point, if you're really on a loop and you're really just caught at your introverted functions, you just need to get out. Deal with it, parcel it out to yourself. You need to force yourself to get out, and get out early, because that's the thing, is you start the day and the day goes on and you're sort of spinning your gears, and you're thinking and you're fantasizing about this and that, and you take revenge on this person and whatever it might be, and you turn into Hamlet and you're just pacing in your kitchen for, you know, weeks at a time. Anyone who's had that experience can, I'm sure, relate to that. But the thing to do then is just get out. Yeah. Absolutely.
Which personality type is the closest to its stereotype, in your opinion?
I met so many different varieties of so many different types that that's really hard to say. I want to give an answer because I hate giving those kinds of answers, but I mean, the STPs are going to STP.
What effects do you see the world having if humans had a better relationship with the more negative emotions?
Ooh. See, the question is, what's a better relationship to the more negative emotions? I mean, I think that again, treading carefully, there is a tremendous, specifically modern terror of death that is a curse on us. So I think in dealing with it, in dealing with others, moving on, in dealing with the inevitability of ourselves, moving on, and I think it's another side effect of this sort of, for all of the gifts that we've gotten from this, you know, technological revolution, that the idea is more and more comfort, less and less suffering. And that's the sort of utilitarian way to go about things, but it also comes with the side effect of just absolute terror of death. And I think meditating on death, again, so everyone has their own experience. If you got trauma, whatever the case is, all the caveats. I think about it a lot, and not in an unhealthy way. And I think it would be better if we could be more accepting and less, because that terror comes out in just all sorts of ways, and none of them are good.
What's an NI insight you've been churning on in the head noodle of yours for years?
Just how history moves, what are the threads that tie history together. I think one of the worst books I've ever read, but I also will give a compliment that it's extremely entertaining, and like he's a good writer. It's just that I completely disagree with what he does. Is the book Sapiens? It's Yuval Noah Harari, I think is the author's name, and it's this long history of the march of humanity from, you know, prehistoric times through a number of revolutions to the modern day, where we have all of this magical, you know, technology. And I would type him as an INTJ, and I think he's definitely has. I mean, I'm not saying he's unrealistic. I think he has a pretty clear-eyed vision actually about where all of this is going. He's still kind of a techno optimist, and he always hedges, but I think I think he has insights, but that story of just one march, all you have is just this big, just ocean of data, and there's nothing. I mean, it's too much data, and the movements are too broad. So I think thinking about, like, if you were able to go back 2,500 years, your sense and apprehension of the world around you, just based on the sort of the cultural situation and everything, even though we tend to see ourselves, I mean, at least in, America, et cetera, as like an extension, like there's a story that goes from ancient Greece to today. But if we were to go back and just suddenly be like, magically we have the language and can communicate, I think it would be there'd be no ground to communicate on. It would be like, it would be like total absolute science fiction for both parties. So those, whatever, I could go on and on, but those kinds of things.
Cool. And so 2 more questions and we'll end off the panel. Do you think a lack of motivation and initiation on projects or important tasks is a sign of inferior SE, a combination of the two, or something else entirely?
I mean, it depends on the context. It's like, I've in my experience, friends who are, FP types, like, you'll see that just because, they sort of just flow. And if that thing isn't in flow with them, then, it's not necessarily getting done. So there'll be an extroverted thinking kind of thing. But I also experienced this. And I think, it's just not ready, is the way I interpret it when that happens. It's just not ready to be acted upon. And if there's a deadline, then that's a different thing. But see, a deadline will get me into gear, though, so then that doesn't happen. That only happens when it's just this floating thing that's just sort of nagging at me. Just speaking about me personally, it's because it's not ready yet. And there's sort of things are sorting themselves out in the background. I don't know if, Joyce, you have that experience too.
Interesting. I'll think about it. I'll let it.
I mean, you grind away on these videos, so it's not like you know.
It's more like,
how many of these
friends?
What number is this now?
160-ish, around there.
Oh my God. Good God, I got 5. I have 5 videos on my channel.
Yeah.
6. I have 6.
Collaboration though, so it's like hanging out with friends, but you do it online with where people can see. Do you think there's still opportunity for innovation in writing? What are the most innovative things you've discovered from recent times?
Ooh, from recent times, I think. We're past the kind of postmodern thing, which brought a lot of interesting, like the big, like, if you want to talk about innovation, the big explosion was like modernism. So it's the same time Jung was writing. You had Joyce, Gertrude Stein, Ezra Pound, Samuel Beckett a little bit later. I'm trying to swing from right and left of politics here, just to keep things measured. But and then you had the postmodern style, which brought, that really hit its peak in like the 1970s. So if you're looking at novels, you got like Pynchon, Coover, and that whole group, John Barth. And then you moved into sort of late postmodern. So today, a lot of the best writing is going back to just classical storytelling. That's when I brought up Hilary Mantel, and as annoying as he is, Jonathan Franzen can write. As obnoxious as he is, man, he can write, and he's got a new one coming out soon. Film is the one that's in trouble. Movies need a jump start, especially because, listen, if you're writing prose, You've been locked up for a couple of years. It's great. If you're shooting film, it hasn't, like, it's just everything stops. So there's some interesting stuff coming out. So in that area, I think, like, there's some stuff that's been held back. That's coming out soon. So we'll see. But there's really, if any like art form is in a slump, it's film. It hit a peak in the 70s and then in the 90s, and then you had, wait, hold on, I'm going to go on for a minute here, because then you had 2000 to like 2010, 2015, and things were really affected by the Iraq War. The Hollywood sort of psyche was just like severely damaged and turned psychotic with the Iraq War. And that's when you had all of these torture movies. And that's when Game of Thrones started and Breaking Bad. And there was just this like sense of corruption and everything. And I love that stuff. At that point, I was great. I was on cocaine all the time. I was writing that kind of stuff myself. Now, I think people are stepping back, and there's a sort of nihilism that crept into things. And when you get that kind of just like corrupted kind of storytelling, it's a signal of other things going on. And then once you push through that, it takes a little while to pull out of that. So I'm rooting for the movies, but for now, it's just going back to the classical storytelling. I think is the best work that's going to be done, at least in the next few years, is my guess. Oh boy, we got another one.
Okay, this is the last one.
Okay.
It's a fun question, but what do you think an INTJ would survive in the wild 10,000 years ago? How do you think an INTJ would survive?
God. See, this just goes back. It's so hard, because it's like, how far can you, like, would type even apply? I personally think not, but I can't go on, like, but I'm just trying to think just theoretically. I mean, I don't know, probably. I don't know. There's a different set of concerns. So I assume, like, I would just hope for a generally well-balanced and well-developed type with good guardians. I don't know. I have no answer to this. Yeah.
This is what happens when you tell an NI down to NE.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Lindsay. Oh, you guys are so cute.
Are we in a typology renaissance? That's cool.
You will see more of Michael's videos on his channel. He is a film director of sorts, so his videos are studio quality, as if you went to a cinema. So, oh, thank you, Jesse. Oh, you guys are so nice. Thank you, everyone, for asking such wonderful questions. Yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't get to them all. Very overwhelming for my SE to see so many questions in the chat. With the smaller live streams, with the Q&As that have fewer people, we will get through more of the questions. So if you want to attend those ones, you'll be VIP. But yeah, Michael's the most popular person on Type Talks, so he's getting a lot of viewership today and a lot of questions. So thanks.
That was fun.
All right. Yeah. I'll see everyone around. Bye.